Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. So the Supreme Court, as of this morning, has decided to take up the issue of whether or not red states can ban so-called transgender surgeries on minors. So this headline coming from CNN, the Supreme Court to decide whether states can restrict so-called gender-affirming care for minors. The Supreme Court on Monday agreed to hear the Biden administration's challenge to a transgender care ban in Tennessee, delving into the complicated and politically fraught issue of so-called gender-affirming care in a substantive way for the first time. And you see how headlines, of course, like this one being from CNN, are very biased, and that they put this term gender-affirming care in there to skew what people think. But continuing, so CNN says the state law enacted last year bans hormone therapy and puberty blockers for minors and imposes civil penalties for doctors who violate the prohibitions. It is among a growing number of state laws enacted in recent years targeting transgender care. Nearly half of U.S. states have enacted bans on transgender care for minors, according to the Human Rights Campaign. The case will be heard this fall. So let's welcome in now our legal eagles. Joining me now is Mike Donnelly, who is an attorney and law professor, and Ron Coleman, who is the host of the Coleman Nation podcast and also an attorney with the Dillon Law Group. So, Mike, let's start with you. I mean, obviously, CNN, other leftist outlets are going to be so concerned that there are states that are banning this so-called gender-affirming care, but this is all about the right of states to actually protect children and say, no, I'm sorry, doctors, you cannot mutilate children's bodies under this ridiculous theory that gender-affirming care is even a thing. So where do you think the Supreme Court stands on this in terms of choosing to address this issue now?
Big shocker, CNN trying to spin the news, right? First of all, this is not the Biden administration's lawsuit. This was a lawsuit filed by a group of people who call themselves parents, who want to be able to have these well, I won't call them treatments because that's not what they are. This kind of experimentation happen on kids that they're custodians for. But the Biden administration did intervene, and so they're carrying it forward, and that's significant. This is a challenge to two laws in Kentucky and Tennessee that banned so-called banned, and I don't even like to use that term, but we'll have to come up with another one as well, because what it is doing is protecting children from experimental, scientific experimentation, I guess is a way you could put it. The media likes to use the term gender-affirming. It's and care. It's not affirming and it's not care. It's discouraging. It's constructionist, and it's not care. These treatments go against the core of the person, the child. Children are born men or women, boys or girls. That's what they are. And these activists want to be able to have children choose their gender. And that's not something that children should be able to do. And so Kentucky and Tennessee, like other states, have stepped in and said, these treatments are experimental. We are not going to allow this on children. And that's the right thing to do. And I think Jeff Sutton, who wrote the Sixth Circuit opinion on this, got it exactly right. And when it's my turn next, because we got to let Ron chime in here, I've got a quote from Jeff Sutton.
Okay, sounds good. Well, Ron, this all boils down, I think, to federalism, because the people, through their elected representatives in these states, decided that they wanted to protect children in this manner. And of course, the Human Rights Campaign and the leftists and others are pushing back. But shouldn't the court decide this on the basis of federalism and say, yeah, absolutely, the states within their power have the constitutional and legal prerogative to implement this kind of protection?
Absolutely. It is a federalism issue. They're not going to rule on whether or not these are good treatments or bad treatments. They should, but they won't. What they may do, though, is shave a little bit off Obergefell, because Obergefell was a gigantic loss for federalism in the sexual cultural revolution context. And Obergefell will have to be cited at the very least. And anything that can be, I don't see them using this as an opportunity to reverse Obergefell. I don't think this is that case. I don't know if that is ever going to happen, but that's where the battle is. It's a federalism battle, and it's quite surprising that the Biden administration which, as Mike pointed out, is carrying the water here, did file for cert here because, as of now, it's only a Sixth Circuit problem. I think they're about to find themselves with a national problem.
Yeah, and this is very interesting heading into the election. The Biden administration would choose to be the face of this suit. But Mike, before we get to the judge's quote, which I know that you'll bring up in this segment, the question for you as well is whether or not the Biden administration are basically leaning in to their hardcore extreme leftist policies. And look at this appointment of Tyler Cherry, this new assistant communications director that is openly queer, openly pro-BLM, anti-ICE, I mean, pro-pride, everything absolutely crazy leftist. And Biden doesn't seem to care about November, at least. By Biden, I mean, all of the people in his administration that are clearly making a lot of these decisions, maybe even without his knowledge.
Well, it was a little surprising to me, and I did see that on X platform, and I looked at it, and I was like, "Wow, that's troubling." He repudiated apparently. Well, it appears that way. Tyler Cherry apparently repudiated some of his past, but it is a very striking and troubling past, and it does appear that the Biden administration is leaning into this, and I think that only helps Trump. I think people are not okay with that. I think the American people are going to see a clear choice, and when Biden is appointing people like this to be on his team, people know where he stands.
Yeah, and go ahead and give the judge's quote, if you will, so that people know what you're referring to.
Oh, thank you, Jen. I appreciate that. So Jeff Sutton, who, by the way, I think Jeff Sutton should be on Trump's list of Supreme Court nominees. I think Jeff Sutton, he's Chief Judge of the Sixth Circuit, is very good, and this opinion is excellent. He says, question after question arises under the plaintiff's approach, which is to treat this as an equal protection problem. And answer after answer confirms that expert consensus, whether in the medical profession or elsewhere, is not the North Star of substantive due process, lest judges become spectators rather than referees in construing our Constitution. Basically, what he's pointing out is that, the pro people here, the Biden administration and the people, the Human Rights Campaign, want to say, oh, look at the experts. They say this is okay. Look at WPATH and look at the 20 years of medical experimentation that has been going on. That makes it okay. And Jeff Sutton says, no, it doesn't. This is something that legislators need to be concerned about. And he's saying that legislators in the states have been regulating medical treatment for many, many years. It's a legitimate state interest. This is not a suspect class, which the Biden administration cited in their briefs. They said, oh, transgender status is a quasi-suspect class, or sex, it should be treated with heightened scrutiny because we're talking about sex here. No, Jeff Sutton got it exactly right, and let's put him on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully, Ron, this is an indication by the Supreme Court taking up this case that it's an indication that they are going to hold in favor of federalism, and they are going to issue an opinion from a conservative majority that is very strong. I would love to see Obergefell overturned. And regardless of whether where anyone stands on the issue of so-called same-sex marriage as a Christian, I think it's absolutely preposterous that we are using the term marriage for this type of obviously sexually deviant behavior. But for the government to actually call it that and to go so far outside the bounds of federalism is the main problem. And so where do we think that the Supreme Court is going to end up on this when they hear this case in the fall?
I agree with you 100%, Jenna. The signal seems to be, oh, Biden administration, you want us to decide? We'll decide.
Yeah. And I hope that it's a very strong majority. And so, Mike,
it'll be 6-3.
Where do we expect? You think? Yeah, you think it'll be 6-3? And so, okay, so for the liberal justices, this is always my question. How do they, I mean, we know how they get away with it, but how do they, with their oath of office, actually contort themselves into pretzels, Ron, so much that they are willing to issue opinions that are so divorced from the original text of the Constitution? I mean, how do they sleep at night doing that?
Well, since Brennan and Marshall, Thurgood Marshall, that is, what we've seen is that even being on the Supreme Court doesn't prevent, in fact, may even encourage judges with a leftist orientation to ignore legal analysis and say, but what's the thing we really want to have happen here? It's really an emergency. It's really people. It's really you'll always hear Sotomayor talking about this decision disregards the effect on hundreds of, whether it's immigrants or whatever the case, or thousands of. That's not the Supreme Court's job. The Supreme Court's job is to construe statutes and the Constitution. Policymakers are the ones who are supposed to make decisions about the effects on people, unless it's in an injunction, posture, which is not here. So that's how they rationalize it, and it's sort of a bit of demagoguery, but I don't think they're doing it as demagogues. I think that's really how they think that these cases should be decided, based on what feels good to them.
Right. And that's really the concern, is that this is so emotionally based often when you get into judicial activism, instead of substantively based in the U.S. Constitution. And this is why we need more and more Federalist judges.